Hello there, and welcome to this video on servicing a Huma regulator. In this video we're going to be servicing the regulator found in the Daystate Huntsman Revere, the BRK XR Concept, as well as the BRK XR Ranger. This regulator here is common through all three models. I have already removed the regulator from the rifle just to save us a little bit of time. However, if you require a full disassembly guide for your particular rifle, that can be found on both the Daystate and the BRK YouTube channels. To go along with the video guides, there is also a full workshop guide that can be found on the BRK or the Daystate websites. And then the last thing that I would like to mention before we get started on the service procedure is that if you require any O-rings for your regulator, they can be purchased from the Huma-Air website. The service kit contains all of the O-rings present in the regulator, a small amount of silicone grease, as well as the small white sealing disc. With that all said and done, we can begin on the service procedure. The first thing we're going to do is take a set of calipers and measure the current set point of the adjuster screw. What we're going to be measuring is from the tip of the adjuster screw down to the top of the regulator body. On this rifle it's about 2.4 millimeters. We'll just check it in a few different places to make sure that we're getting roughly the same measurement. We'll need that measurement there for when we go to rebuild the regulator. What this will allow us to do is set the regulator pressure to roughly what it is now. And then to start with the disassembly, we're going to be removing this snap ring on the base of the regulator, and that will allow us to get the piston out. So we're just using some internal snap ring pliers just to remove that snap ring. And then we can come back through with a long M3 bolt, screw that into the base of the piston, and gently pull it out, being nice and careful not to lose any of the belvils as we pull it out. Now if you look in the body of the regulator there, you can see the white sealing disc, so we're just going to tap that out, and there you see it falls straight out. The last thing we can remove is the adjuster screw in the top, and we're going to be doing that using a nice wide flat bladed screwdriver. Now we have the adjuster screw. With the regulator fully disassembled, the next thing we'll do is go through all of the O-rings and their respective functions. And starting off with this one on the end of the regulator adjuster screw, this one stops high pressure air from the cylinder from entering the low pressure side of the regulator chamber. And if this O-ring has failed, high pressure air will be able to bypass through the regulator from the cylinder into the regulated air chamber. So eventually, regulator pressure will equalize with cylinder pressure. The next two O-rings, the two on the regulator piston, this one at the base and then this one at the tip, stop regulated air pressure from entering the Belleville chamber. The Belleville chamber is bled off to atmosphere, and if either of these two O-rings here fail, air will be able to leak out from the atmospheric breathe hole in the side of the regulator. And on the rifle, this leak will appear between the cylinder and the main body of the rifle, so the joint between those two components. I have the cylinder off the XR Ranger here, so the leak itself will be emanating from the joint of these two components. So hopefully that makes sense. The last two O-rings, the two on the body, so this one around the outside and then this one on the base, serve a similar purpose to the ones on the regulator piston. And on the rifle, this leak will appear between the cylinder and the main body of the rifle, so the joint between those two components. And again, that would be between the cylinder and the main block of the rifle. The last seal we have present in the regulator is the white sealing disc, so this piece here. The white sealing disc acts like a valve between the adjuster screw and the regulator piston, and it stops air from bypassing from the cylinder high pressure air side of the rifle into the low pressure or the regulated air side of the rifle. If the white sealing disc has failed, you'll be seeing a lot of regulator creep. So regulator creep can be defined as any unwanted pressure increase after the regulator has reached its set pressure. So for example, if we had a regulator set at 90 bar, we took a shot, the regulator would reset to 90 bar. If we were then to leave the rifle for 10 minutes and the reg pressure was now 110 bar, that would be 20 bar of creep. The creep in that scenario would be caused by either the white sealing disc or the O-ring present on the end of the adjuster screw. In that application, we would replace both of these items. With that all said and done, the next thing we'll do is remove all of the O-rings. So we're going to be replacing them on this regulator. What I like to do is pinch the O-rings, give them a nice squeeze, and then push them off to one side. That humps the O-ring over, then we can either use our fingers or a plastic O-ring pick to pick the O-ring off. So there we have that one there. The one on the base can be just removed with our nails or an O-ring pick. And the same can be done for the one on the adjuster screw. So again, pinching the O-rings, pushing them off to one side, and then flicking them out. Nice and simple. Now the O-rings themselves should still be nice and supple, so they should be nice and bendy. Although sometimes if the regulator hasn't been serviced in quite a while, the O-rings can go very hard and brittle. When the O-rings go hard and brittle, we have to use another method in order to get them out of the seat. What I like to do is take our part here, then take either a razor blade or a scalpel blade and very gently and carefully cut through the O-ring. Now you don't want to go all the way through the O-ring and score the O-ring seat. What you do need to do is be very careful not to damage any of the sealing surfaces of the regulator as you cut through. Luckily on this particular regulator the O-rings are still nice and soft, so we can just pinch them up and then hook them off with our O-ring pick. And then the final one on the regulator piston is a little tricky because it's so close to the Belleville washers. So being nice and careful, we'll pinch it up, then hook it out. If the O-ring looks like it's a little stuck in its seat, what you can do is lightly grip the O-ring and then twist the piston. This normally frees the O-ring off from the seat and makes it a little easier to remove from the actual piston itself. But there we have it, there's all of the old O-rings removed, so what I'm going to do now is get everything cleaned up and degreased, and then I'll bring you back when we actually start rebuilding the regulator. Right then, and that is the entire regulator fully degreased. What I ended up doing was spraying all the components down with isopropyl alcohol, then using a small toothbrush and a cotton bud to just remove all of the old grease. As you can see here, I've got all the components nicely laid out, and we can start on the reassembly process. The first thing we're going to do is restack the Belleville washers onto the regulator piston. The first thing we're going to do is take our Belleville washers and just add a small amount of silicone grease to each washer. Just a nice small amount to each washer will do. As you can see here, I've also laid the Belleville washers in pairs, ready to be stacked onto the piston. Depending on your pressure setup, you may have different thicknesses of Belleville washers, but I'll put all of the stack combinations on screen now so that you can see them. The next thing we'll do is carefully stack the Belleville washers onto the regulator piston. And as I said before, the Belleville washers are cupped in pairs and we're laying them in alternating sets. The next thing we can do is add the O-rings, and again before these go on I am just going to be adding a small amount of silicone grease to them. Just a small amount will do us. Then hooking them into their respective seats. Same with the O-ring on the end of the adjuster screw. Small amount of silicone grease and then hook that into position. The next thing I'm going to do is just take a little bit more silicone grease and add it to the inside of the regulator body. Now you don't want to pack this full of silicone grease, but you do need a little bit in there, especially as we have just fully degreased everything, so everything is nice and dry, ready for our new grease. But there we have it, just a small amount will do us. What we can do then is take our regulator piston, add a small amount of silicone grease to the top of the piston, and then add our white sealing disc. So there we have it. This one is a new one, so it's nice and fresh on the top there. Although if you want to, you can still use your old white sealing disc. You simply need to flip it. On one side there'll be a dimple, and on the other side it should be nice and fresh. So you want the nice flat fresh side facing up. But with that done, we can gently put the piston into the regulator body, being nice and careful not to pinch the white sealing disc between the walls of the regulator body. So there we have it. We can then add our snap ring to the back. Pushing that down, making sure it's nice and seated within its groove. The last thing we can do is add our adjuster screw, and before this goes in I am just going to be adding a small amount of extra silicone grease to this. Then we can push it in place. As we get the adjuster screw screwed into position, we are going to be bringing back our calipers and rechecking our measurement. So when we took it apart it was about 2.4 millimeters, so we need to go a little further in. Right then, and after a little bit of work we've got the regulator reset to what it was before we took it apart. So about 2.4 millimeters. I'm quite happy there. The last thing to do is add our final O-rings, and again we are just going to be adding a small amount of silicone grease around these O-rings before they go in. The final thing we need to do is make sure that the regulator is working. So normally what you would do is reinstall your regulator into your rifle, check the rifle over the chronograph, and just make sure it's functioning as it should. To make things a little easier for the video though, I have got myself here a regulator tester, so we're going to be installing the regulator into that and just making it sure it works. Right then, so there we have the regulator all pressurized up. We can simulate taking a shot by loosening this valve here. And as you can see there, the regulator is resetting back to about 104 bar each and every time. The regulator itself will take a few shots just to bed itself in, but for the initial testing I'm really quite happy with that result. So the last thing we'll do is remove the regulator from the tester, and then I'll show you how to adjust the reg pressure. Right then, so adjusting the regulator is nice and easy. All we need is a flat bladed screwdriver and to adjust the adjuster screw. Turning the screw clockwise reduces reg pressure, turning it counterclockwise increases reg pressure. On these regulators, about 1/8 of a turn is roughly 10 to 15 bar of adjustment. And the only other thing that I'll mention in regards to adjusting your reg pressure is that going down is no problem. However, when going up, what you need to do is go slightly over your set pressure, then come back down onto it. So counterclockwise, and then back it down clockwise. What this will do is take the backlash out of the screw threads, and you should end up with a more accurate reg pressure setting. If you're not sure on what your regulator pressure should be for your particular rifle and caliber, Daystate have a full list of all the current set points for their regulators on the Daystate website. So if you're not sure, you can consult that particular chart. But with that all said, that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video. So thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been useful, and we'll see you in the next one.